Getting out into nature, beyond the city limits, after turning 30, didn't happen as often as I would have liked. As I got older, morning jogs became rare, and I couldn't find other reasons for such walks. Maybe it was a coincidence, or maybe the stars aligned. I don't know how to put it correctly. Perhaps there was some meaning, some kind of message in what happened, as if it was meant to be. A vacation, a complete lack of plans, a recommendation from my doctor. Spend more time outdoors. These three moments synchronized. Early autumn, an absurd determination, and a strange urge to leave the city, to wander in nature without any purpose. That's how it all happened in a Sunday morning. The first turn came about 10 minutes past the city limits. A dirt road led into the wilderness, a continuous strip of forest stretching from the lowlands up to the horizon. I had been there once before as a child. Parking my car where the road ended, I got out. An hour passed in silence, and within that hour, I felt a strange sense of emotional completeness from the walk. I don't remember my thoughts at that moment. It's hard to explain. I wasn't engaged in inner dialogue. I wasn't rearranging words in my head. I wasn't revisiting mental images. Something else happened along with that walk. Imagine my surprise when, retracing my steps along the same path, I came across the smoldering remains of a fire. Right in the center of what seemed to be a hastily extinguished campfire lay a thick, blackened square covered in soot. A notebook. I was intrigued. The heat from the fire was weak, and the notebook wasn't even smoldering. Only a couple of small blisters of bubbled skin on the surface stood out, looking like they would burst at the slightest touch. Using a couple of sticks, I pulled it out of the embers and stomped on it. The hissing and bubbling stopped. The notebook looked heavy and old. At first, I mistook it for a book, and only when I saw the intricate calligraphic handwriting inside did I realize it was someone's personal journal. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to take it home to read. What I read at home unsettled me deeply. No, if you think it was some kind of curse, or a pass it on, or else everyone will die story, I assure you, it was nothing like that. The text was written as if by a schizophrenic. I almost gave up reading after a few sentences because, to me, it seemed like the ramblings of a madman. But after a few dozen lines, the chaotic cosmic nonsense started to take form, and what followed felt deeply disturbing. I'm just an ordinary person. I don't have deep knowledge of religion, mysticism, or esotericism. Half of what I read was incomprehensible abracadabra to me, but the other half, I understood it. And that's what frightened me. I remember wanting to believe that this was just someone's attempt at writing fiction, or simply the delusions of a lunatic. That was before the terrifying things started happening. You might want to believe the same. So, here is the text from the notebook, unedited. It seems that before life, she and I were something like gods. In the void, where vast currents of possibility and potential flowed together. There was nothing there, just as there was no space in which anything could happen. Certain fragments of that conditional world resembled the remnants of decayed universes. A process. Infinite depths foamed, and were instantly swallowed by the sands of oblivion. I remember the sensation of something stepping onto that sand and sinking into the atoms of a non-existent eternity. Back then, her footprints were the only thing that ever happened. Around this place, gods were born and creations took form. Then, decay consumed them, and the cycle completed. Our existence was like a game. We would become endless universes before inevitably succumbing to the end of all things. Someone would appear in the form of nothing, concluding yet another cycle of the infinite game. Then there was the void. A void where we pretended we did not exist. A flash, and then the Big Bang. Another after which we hid for a long time, gathering ourselves from gas and becoming the light of the first cooling stars. We shone for each other at opposite ends of infinity, never meeting until we burned out, making way for the light that traveled through the depths of the universe. Our light, moving towards each other, was the harbinger of yet another cycle's end, and once it met, non-existence would return. She liked this. And maybe it was then that she invented time, one of her many children. As she played, she created eternities, until the cycle of existence and non-existence gave way to another void. One more, this time unimaginable. Like flower seeds, she planted time. Her tiny garden perished before it had a chance to bloom. In the eternal flow of reality, the structure of time crumbled. Each time, she created new children for herself. These creations scattered through the boundless void, becoming the foundation of her unseen sorrow, which only grew stronger. With each cycle, her children became more complex, but their demise was no less tragic, and so her grief deepened. Once, our games were innocent. They weren't plagued by her child, time which devoured light and eternity. Reality, another one of her children, did not intrude upon them. But the cycle was inevitable, and all her children perished, again and again. Deep sorrow pushed her towards decisions that inevitably had the heaviest consequences. She wanted her children to live forever, for their existence not to end with the completion of yet another cycle. At the same time, her games became increasingly destructive in nature. She proposed devouring the boundless shadows, in the space of endless void, eternity, and light. There was nothing concrete there, only strange shapes, figures, and the light that allowed their shadows to exist. The horror of this game was that as soon as one of us consumed the shadow of something, that object ceased to exist in eternity forever. It disappeared from all cycles, irreversibly and completely. The shadows of circles, spirals, and misty clouds drifted slowly over the timeless surface of that place. She consumed the shadow of a circle it vanished. I had to act in return, so I ate the shadow of a small passing cloud, and it too disappeared. Taking turns, we consumed the shadows of that world, not noticing how it grew emptier and emptier. Eventually, besides our two shadows, nothing remained in that world. It was just a game, but she refused to give up. It was her turn. Everything should have ended, ceased. The cycle had to conclude so that a new one could begin, just as it had before, and should have again. But instead, she did not surrender. She did not stop the game. She flew towards her immense shadow, descended to the timeless surface until her shadow became small, and then she swallowed it and disappeared. And I was left alone. It is now obvious to me that she wanted to save her children. She had to sacrifice herself to keep them from being lost with the arrival of a new cycle. With her disappearance, everything came to a halt, for she was the one who restarted eternity, who gave birth to everything. After she vanished, my fall began. No matter how hard I tried to find her, no matter how much I struggled to delay another incarnation into material reality, the outcome was always the same: a fall. Into a new world, confined by another shell and its needs. Into places where desires and emotions reign. They blind and force one to forget the truth. My attempts to find her are futile. In these worlds, there is nothing but disappointment and pain. They also prevent me from searching, forcing my mind onto other things. Thoughts are limited. Just like the human body, they are powerless before eternity. Before my time in another shell comes to an end, I begin to remember, to recall what was before my human incarnation. I begin to recall my other lives, where I first tried not to forget the truth, scratching it onto rock with charcoal before death. How I succumbed to the flawed preachings of early Christianity and ended up in a noose. How I was one of 100 drowning sailors in the ocean when a ship bound for distant lands was wrecked by a storm. Closer to our days, such revelations got me locked away in an asylum, where death found me in the embrace of madness. There, I was unable to piece everything together, to record what I had managed to understand in my lifetime. But time has changed, and now I have a little time to write this down, to leave a clue for myself, for the one who will return to this world in another incarnation. He will search for her. I will search for her. I will remember, for a brief moment before death, as I have remembered before in my past lives. If I manage to find these records earlier, perhaps the chance to continue and comprehend my search more deeply will increase. Time is running out. Her child is hungry. I recall how, after the death of another human shell, I briefly returned to the place of our last game. In that faceless, empty space, I search for her endlessly. Without her, everything has lost meaning, and the eternal game has turned into suffering, one without beginning or end. It's foolish, but I've tried everything. I even wanted to end myself, not here, not in the body, but there, in eternity. The last time I attempted to repeat her actions, I flew towards my shadow. Without hesitation, I devoured it and disappeared to suddenly realize I had swallowed the shadow of the sun. I vanished, as I had many times before. But it was useless. The sun is just the sun, a lifeless dot in the night sky. The entire world is just a reflection, a distortion of the universe. What I am forced to consider as myself increasingly understands this, and with that revelation, the meaning of everything slips further away. The realizations become ever more terrifying. Human shells in each new incarnation grow worse. They resist, refuse to remember. They chase pleasures, the illusions of life. They forget the eternal, thinking more about what they mistakenly consider themselves. They identify with it. There are things I do not want to understand. Terrifying realizations of what is happening, what is coming. There is no escaping this knowledge. Perhaps that is what finds me just before death. I have an understanding that I remember, that I have remembered everything. I recall how I have remembered. All of this has already happened. Only the final truth always lies somewhere beyond these recurring memories. I am even afraid to write these lines. Perhaps I will never find her, because she was my light, and with the disappearance of her light, my shadow vanished as well. The real, eternal shadow. Everything is over. Now I am human, and I write all of this. It is so incoherent that if I did not understand the truth of these words, if I were to read them as an outsider, I would without hesitation dismiss everything written here as complete madness. Let it be so. I am afraid to acknowledge that her children, the ones she left in eternity, are also searching for their mother. They are deeply sorrowful. They are angry. Right now, perhaps they have not yet realized what has happened. For them, not even a second has passed. The understanding of what occurred has not yet reached them. I do not know how much time will pass before one of them rushes to search for her. She was the light for all of us. For me and for them. Without her light, I fell endlessly and forgot my true nature. But they, without her light, absorbed the darkness. The darkness nurtured them like abandoned chicks. With her disappearance, the cycle did not end. And her children grew up. It was not enough. They wanted more. The darkness made them twisted, grotesque. Her children began to multiply, to fill the familiar world with their offspring war. Death, hunger, fear, pain, suffering. Their hunger is no less great. They devour this world ever faster. They cannot be satisfied. They are coming for all of us, not just for me. We are but a pale reflection of what existed before human incarnation. A reminder of their mother. All of us. Humans. It seems my time is coming to an end, for the revelations have become too many. But the thought won't leave me that I am missing something important. The thought won't leave me that usually I did not end this way, that it was different somehow. I am terrified that I am beginning to forget, and I will keep forgetting, until the story of what happened before human incarnation fades into an empty page. Forgetting, until I become just another blindly living human, while they will remember and come for me. For all of us. On one hand, it was obvious this was the ramblings of a madman, but on the other hand, something inside me responded to it. I wanted to believe in something like this, in some kind of eternity beyond death. After transcribing the contents of the notebook and uploading it online, for some reason, I hesitated to throw it away. I can't remember exactly why. Maybe it was the faint, bitter smell of the campfire it carried. Maybe it was the sheer madness of its contents, or maybe even the fact that someone had tried to burn it, but failed. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe I thought its owner would come looking for it. Or that it was part of some elaborate modern orgy had heard about those before. Or maybe, just maybe, I hoped it was real. A week passed after I anonymously uploaded the notebook's content online. The post had about 8 views, and I was pretty sure most of them were mine. No reactions, no comments. No surprise, who would care? But now, knowing what came next, I suspect that at least one of those 8 views wasn't mine. It's quite possible that this was when it happened for the first time. Usually, you don't pay attention to things like this. Just another drunk crawling around the yard at dawn on all fours. Who cares? The neighborhood was rough, full of the wrong kind of people, but at least the rent was cheap. Some wasted guy banging his head against the wall of my building. Who knows what rot gut he drank the night before. The workday passed quickly. I came home. He was still there, still weakly ramming his forehead into the wall. 9 hours had passed. He should have sobered up by now. The local grandmas should have chased him off by now, called the cops if nothing else. But instead, the whole world seemed to ignore him. No one acknowledged his existence. Not a single video of a vodka zombie showed up in the local Telegram channel. No reaction at all. It was as if no one saw him but me. I saw that man a few more times after that. And then, by the end of December, he disappeared. The temperatures dropped below freezing. Crawling on all fours across frozen concrete and slamming your skull into a brick wall probably wasn't too pleasant even for a body pickled in alcohol. I had hoped the cold would get rid of him until spring. By then, I planned to move to another apartment, somewhere closer to the city center. But the man crawled back every single morning. One day, I decided to chase him away. Talking to him was useless, just moaned incoherently. So I grabbed him under the armpits, dragged him across the yard to the nearest bench, and left him there. Got into my car, glanced at the rearview mirror, and there he was, like a baby, slowly crawling back toward the building, weakly bumping his forehead against the wall. Watching him, I couldn't tell was he trying to hurt himself or the building. His movements were so soft, barely even touching the wall. His forehead met the bricks as lightly as a whisper. He wasn't even bruising himself. He wasn't breaking anything. He was just there. I didn't want to call an ambulance. I knew how they handled these things. They didn't waste time on drunks and vagrants. The police probably wouldn't bother either. Still, I dialed emergency services and told them a man was unconscious, possibly having a stroke. They weren't happy. Asked if I was a doctor, if I had any business making diagnoses. But they still came. Drove around the courtyard for a while. I know they saw him. He was impossible to miss. It wasn't until I walked them directly to him that they reluctantly started asking questions. So I lied again, said he was disabled, lived in a neighboring building. Then they took him away. Released him that same night. Never answered another call about him again. And still, every morning came crawling back. Until, one day in January, he froze to death. The text I read left me with mixed feelings. On one hand, it was clearly the ramblings of a madman. On the other, some part of me resonated with it. I wanted to believe in something like that, in some eternity that exists after death. After transcribing the contents of the notebook and posting it online, I hesitated to throw it away. It's hard to recall exactly why now. Maybe it was the bitter smell of the campfire it carried, or the insane content it held, or even the fact that someone had tried to burn it, yet it remained intact. I don't remember why I didn't discard it. Perhaps I thought its owner would come looking for it, or that it was part of some newfangled Argy'd heard about those before. Or maybe there was just some hope that it was all true. A week passed after I anonymously posted the notebook's contents online. The publication had about 8 views, all probably mine. No reaction on the internet. Not surprising who would care. But now, knowing what would happen next, I suspect that one of those 8 views wasn't mine. It's quite likely that this is when it happened for the first time. Usually, you don't pay attention to such things, someone crawling on all fours in the yard in the morning, probably drunk, so be it. The neighborhood was like that, bad people, but cheap housing. A drunk guy slowly banging his head against the wall of a house who knows what kind of rotgut he drank the day before. The workday flew by quickly, then back home, and that drunk was in the same spot, feebly ramming his head against the house. He should have sobered up in the 9 hours I was at work. And the local grandmas should have chased him away, or at least called the police. Instead, it was as if the surroundings didn't notice him. No new videos of the Ethel Ghoul appeared in the city telegram channel. No reaction at all. It seemed like no one cared. I saw that man a couple more times before he disappeared until the end of December. The temperatures dropped below freezing. Crawling on all fours on frozen ground and banging one's head against a brick house would likely be extremely unpleasant, even for the most alcohol-soaked organism. I hoped that with the onset of frost, he would disappear until spring, by which time I planned to rent another apartment, perhaps closer to the center. The man crawled over every day, early in the morning. Once, I wanted to chase him away. Attempts to talk to him yielded no results. He mumbled incoherently. So, I decided to drag him away from the house. I pulled him by the armpits to the nearest bench and left him there. Got into the car, looked in the rearview mirror, and he, like an infant, slowly crawled back to the house, still feebly banging his head against it. Watching this, I couldn't understand whom he was trying to harm, himself or the house. The blows couldn't cause any damage to the house. It was like hitting the air. He probably wasn't hurting himself either. There was no force in his headbutts. He was just touching the house with his forehead. I didn't want to call an ambulance, knowing how they operate. They usually don't respond to calls about the homeless and drunks. The police likely wouldn't take him either. I settled on the ambulance. Had to say that a person was unconscious, probably a stroke. They were rude, asked if I was a doctor to make such diagnoses, but they came. Drove around the yard for a long time. I'm sure they saw him, it was impossible not to notice. Only when I got out of the car and led them to him did they reluctantly start asking questions. Had to lie that he was from a neighboring house, disabled. Then they took him away and released him that same evening. They didn't respond to further calls, and he crawled over every day until one morning in January this year, he froze to death. Someone even left a small wreath at the place where the man had frozen to death. A day or two later, stray dogs tore it apart. I had a sickening feeling like I could have changed something. That if I had tried harder, if I hadn't been so indifferent, maybe his fate would have been different. These thoughts tormented me. Until another person appeared in the exact same spot. Just like the first, he kept banging his head against the wall. And just like before, no one noticed. A day later, an old man joined him. 2 days after that, a young guy. At first, they looked like the kind of people you might dismiss a disheveled drunk, some homeless addict. But now, the ones coming to my building looked normal. Clean clothes, decent shoes. But their eyes, empty. They were in some kind of trance. Sometimes one of their phones would ring echoing across the courtyard. It meant someone was trying to reach them. A friend? A family member? I watched. I tried to analyze what was happening. I spoke to them, shoved them, but they didn't care. They were hypnotized, devoid of will. Every morning, their unstable, staggering procession approached my home. One morning, watching from my kitchen window, I saw how they arrived. It wasn't a coordinated march. With dawn, they simply appeared. From everywhere. Some came crawling over the garage roofs. Instead of jumping down, they fell. Lay motionless for a few seconds, then rose and kept walking. Others walked across the kindergarten playground, climbed over the concrete fence, stood back up and kept moving. Some of them opened the windows on the second floor of the building across from mine, stepped out, as if there was solid ground beneath their feet. And when there wasn't, they fell and crawled toward my house. Within 2 weeks, there were dozens of them. Men, women, children, and yet no one else seemed to notice. Madness took hold. At first, they had simply banged their heads. Then they adapted. They stopped using their skulls. They brought bricks, planks, and stones. Tapped them softly against the building. They couldn't do any real damage. At most, they left chalk-like scuffs, shallow dents. The house stood firm. Another week passed. Their slow, clumsy movements became rhythmic blows. Someone dragged an iron street sign, used it as a spear to stab the corner of the house. Others struck with rebar, rusted metal scraps. And then, they changed. A pair of thin girls in high heels. ran the building with a 12-section radiator. A frail old woman lifted a heavy iron sewer cover above her head and slammed it into the bricks. Watching them was like hypnosis. You tell yourself, it will stop. The world will return to normal. But it never stops. It only gets worse. The real problem? You can't look away. The old world is still solid beneath your feet. The new, insane reality hasn't fully taken over yet. And while I stood there, watching, thinking what comes next, something inside me broke. Something screamed, "Run." I had few belongings. By nightfall, I was gone. New apartment, other side of the city. At the time, did I connect it to the notebook? Probably not. I blamed its contents. The words, the information. I thought it had somehow warped my life, like I had understood something while reading it. Now it's all too obvious. 3 days later, a news post appeared in the city's Telegram channel. Part of the building where I had once lived had collapsed. The article called it an accident, said the house was unstable, but the harsh frost had been the final blow. But I knew the truth, and knowing it terrified me. Less than a week after I moved, they found me. I saw them crawling toward the building. At first, they were like infants, crawling. Then they learned to stand. Then they grouped together. Then they found better tools. They began breaking things. They chipped away at the foundation of my old apartment. A crack spread through the walls. A few days ago, they tried to break into my apartment. Marks appeared along the doorframe. The hinges covered in brick dust. They pounded the door while I was out, tried to break it down. They learn slowly, but they adapt fast. Yesterday, they tried picking my lock, scratched at it with nails, jammed something inside. I could barely get the door open. Inside, the stench was horrific, like something rotting beyond comprehension. Like someone had left street filth to simmer in a pot on the stove. Like someone had fried sun-scorched insulation foam, the kind that peeks from the cracks of metal garages. Like someone had boiled water used to mop stairwells and subway platforms. That's what it smelled like. The life I once knew, decaying. The brain is a strange thing. The moment I smelled that disgusting stench, I remembered the notebook. I remembered the bitter scent of burned wood it carried. And then, it hit me. The answer was so simple. Maybe the writer of that notebook was talking about them. Her children. All the ugliness of our world. The ones who were abandoned. The ones who had gone so long without her light that, like flowers left in darkness, they began to reach for the abyss. The darkness nurtured them. It gave them strength. They are still searching for her. For their mother. And through these people, through their empty bodies, something was searching for her. Something was possessing them, controlling them, turning them into hollow shells. And it was looking for the notebook. I don't know why. Maybe it was the only written record of her existence in our world. Or maybe it was a painful reminder. A reminder that her children were doomed from the beginning. Not doomed to vanish with the end of another cycle, but doomed to become monstrous. Maybe she knew this. Maybe that's why she chose to disappear. Why she ate her own shadow. She thought if she vanished, so would they. It's terrifying to think about. I'm afraid of becoming whoever wrote that notebook. I only read it a few times. And already, it feels like I understand too much. Destroying the notebook was the first thought that came to my mind. I didn't hesitate. I drove back to the place where I found it. Stopped at a gas station, bought a bag of charcoal and lighter fluid. Took the first turn past the city limits. A snow-covered road stretching into a white horizon. There was no point in looking for the exact spot. The snow had erased everything. I stepped away from the car, kicked some snow aside, and poured out the charcoal. Drenched it in lighter fluid. Struck a match. The fire came alive. The snow hissed beneath it. The flames grew. I threw the cursed notebook in. At first, it just lay there, like it wasn't meant to burn. Then, a thin, white smoke began seeping from its pages. The fire consumed it, and as it burned, the flames turned unnaturally bright, as if an entire world was being destroyed inside it. The last few months had been a blur, but standing there, watching the fire, a flood of emotions hit me. Frustration, apathy, disappointment. Like something important was being lost. I stared at the flames, deep in thought, until all of those feelings were swallowed by raw, burning terror. Behind me, in the snowy distance, cars, buses, massive trucks. They were coming from all directions, heading straight for me. It was too obvious, too intentional. There was no time to think. I jumped into my car, slammed my foot on the gas, yanked the wheel hard to the left, and sped away from them. There was no chase. As I drove across the open fields, I saw them, pulling up to the fire. Dozens of vehicles. People leaping out, stumbling through the snow, rushing toward the flames. I couldn't see what happened next, and I didn't want to. The last words. When I got home, I sat for a long time trying to process what had happened. There were no thoughts, just emptiness. So I did the only thing I could. I wrote everything, from the beginning, adding it to what was already there, to the insanity that the notebook contained. But why? Why had someone written it by hand? Was the author too old to use the internet? Or had they been running for their life, carrying the only thing they could always keep with them? I would never get the answers. I would never know how their story ended. If they ever found her, or if her monstrous children found them first. But after everything I had seen, after everything that happened, I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was truth in those words, and that truth terrified me. What if they think I'm him? The ones who searched for the notebook. The ones who broke down the wall of my old home. The ones who tried to force their way into my apartment. They look like everyone else. But then, something takes over. Something grabs the controls. And suddenly they obey. And whatever is controlling them, it adapts. It learns. At first, it struggled to control a single man. Now, it controls dozens at once. And this is only the beginning. Maybe posting it online was a mistake. Maybe I should delete everything. Erase the first post before it's too late. But as you can see, I didn't. I want to believe that their attempts to erase this story will end with shattered computer monitors in their homes. Because if they come back, this time I have nothing left to give them. In a way, I've become that cursed notebook myself.